Hello and welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today I'm going to talk about the reading challenge that I mentioned in my very first BookTube video. Hopefully you have seen it, and that's why you've clicked on this video. I am doing the 2024 reading challenge with the Massachusetts Center for the Book. I've never done a reading challenge, and one of my reading goals has been to try to read the books on my shelf and not rely so much on my mood. So I'm hoping that these prompts will help. Now, this is in connection with the Library of Congress Center for the Books. From what I understand, the Library of Congress Center of the Book has affiliates in most, if not all, of the states. I don't know if all states are doing this reading challenge, but if you go to the Library of Congress website, you can look up your local affiliate and then see if your location is doing a similar challenge. Massachusetts just happens to be doing this, so that's what we are going to talk about today. Apologies if I look down. I am looking at my notes. This challenge has already been going on. I don't think that it matters whether you sign up or not if you're just looking for some inspiration to choose books. I've already read the books for January and February, and I'm not going to do full reviews on those just yet. I am planning a video in the future about books that I have read between January and March. Let's get started. For January, the first prompt is a book you read years ago that you may feel different about now. In January, I was attending a literary roundtable, so I was already reading a book that I had read many years ago, and that was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I'm going to do a separate video on this because I have lots of feelings about Wuthering Heights. And that was one of the reasons why I attended this literary roundtable, because I wanted to talk about it more and learn about it more, because there are some things that I'm just not understanding about this book. I have read it several times, and my relationship with this book has changed over the years. I feel like, and maybe it's the blame of Hollywood, Hollywood has sort of touted this as, the epic love story. It is not. Do not read this thinking you're going to get the warm and fuzzies and see this passionate love affair between Heathcliff and Macafee, because it really isn't a love story. It's a very dark book, and I wanted to understand what the heck Emily was thinking when she wrote this. Now, in terms of, do I feel different about this book now? I've flip-flopped over the years. I thought it was a love story when I was a kid. I grew to be angry at the story because it was just so dark, and Emily doesn't give us any moments of light in here. And now I still think it's a dark story, but the more that I've learned about Emily and the story, I can appreciate it as the work of literature that it is. For February, the prompt is a book with a color in the title. So I chose In Search of the Color Purple, The Story of an American Masterpiece by Salamishah Tillet. And anybody who has read The Color Purple has to read this book. It really was so interesting reading about the history of the book, a little bit of Alice Walker's history. Oh, I should have mentioned that Color Purple was written by Alice Walker in the early 1980s. And I am going to go into more depth on this book in a future video. Tillet is an activist and an academic, and this book is part cultural criticism, part Walker's journey on getting to the story of The Color Purple, and it's also part memoir of Tillet herself and her relationship with the story and her journey in learning more about the story. She interviews Walker, she interviews Oprah, she interviews Gloria Steinem, she interviews Quincy Jones, who was in the film version, and you really learn so much about Walker and her motivation and her history and how she came about to writing the story. I highly recommend anyone who has read and loved The Color Purple by Alice Walker to read this, and I will talk more about it later. For March, the prompt is a book whose protagonist has a different culture or lifestyle from you. I chose Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. Now, if you saw my previous video, I did mention that I was currently reading this, and I chose it because it fit into another one of my goals, which was to reread and pass along. I read this book in the 90s. So as you can see, it's a little beat up. It looks like some water got in it and is like peeling off the cover here. I don't remember too much about it when I read it, and but obviously I enjoyed it because I have kept it for over 25 years. If I enjoy it again, I will keep it, and if I decide that I'll never read it again, I'll pass it along. For April, the prompt is a book about nature, the environment, or climate change. I chose Aesop's Animals, The Science Behind the Fables by Jo Wimpenny. I picked this up at a thrift store a while back, and I just thought that was so interesting. I haven't looked at Aesop's Fables in a really, really long time. I do have a version of it. I think it's right there. So I might have to go back to the Fables and actually look at them. Jo Wimpenny is a zoologist, and she is looking at these fables to see if there is any scientific truth to Aesop's portrayal of the animals. And it looks like each chapter covers one fable, and then she talks about specific animal behavior like future planning, using tools, deception, cooperation, stuff like that. I'm looking forward to reading this, and I'll let you know how it goes. For May, the prompt is a graphic novel. Now, I do not own any graphic novels at all, so I did actually have to purchase something for this. I could have gone to the library, but I wanted to choose the list in advance, and by the time I got to the book, maybe it wasn't going to be there, or then I'd have it too long. And then I remembered that there was a graphic novel that I did want in my collection, and so I did pick it up. And this is Why She Wrote by Lauren Burke, Hannah K. Chapman, illustrated by Kaley Bales. And I chose this because the authors are the hosts of one of my favorite literary podcasts, Bonnets at Dawn, which I think might now be defunct because they haven't posted an episode in over a year. So I don't know what happened to them, and I'm really, really bummed. And the whole premise of that podcast was Bronte versus Austen. So Lauren Burke was Team Bronte, and Hannah Chapman was Team Austen. And it was just so much fun talking about all of those authors. And they also brought in other types of authors, female authors, Anne Lister and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, all types of authors. Really, really interesting stuff. So they wrote a book, a graphic history of the lives, inspiration, and influence behind the pens of classic women's writers. They talk about Jane Austen here, Louisa May Alcott, Anne Lister, like I said, Alice Dunbar Nelson, who was a Harlem Renaissance writer. And just look at some beautiful illustrations. This must be Charlotte Bronte. This is just so, and I'm really, really excited to read this, and I really hope that they bring their podcast back. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I don't think I've read anything of hers. Why She Wrote. For June, the prompt is a book that inspired a film or television series. I chose Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and this is translated by Lee Fahnestock and Norma Macafee, based on the 19th century Charles E. Wilbur translation. Okay, we all know that Les Mis, as it's known to the theater kids, has inspired many a film, many a series, many a theater production, and I am embarrassed to admit, as someone who studied theater in college and performed for many years after, has never seen Les Mis. I think they might take my theater card away. So I am actually seeing a production of Les Mis in August, so I need to read the book before I see the production. I've never even seen a movie of this. I've stayed away because I've always wanted to read the book first. This is my opportunity to do so. For those of you who do not know, this mainly follows the story of ex-convict Jean Valjean, who spent like 20 years in prison related to stealing a loaf of bread to feed a starving family member or something like that. Obviously, there are other characters in there. There's, the prostitute Fantine, there's Cosette, there's Inspector Javert, but that's Jean Valjean is the main thread throughout the story. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This is chunky. For July, a book by an author born outside of the United States. I chose The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford. Mitford is British, and she's also a historian. She wrote several biographies in the 1950s about various people, one of them being, I think, Madame du Pompadour, the French courtesan. This I have never read, and there was a fairly recent series on Amazon that I did watch and I did enjoy, so I really am looking forward to reading this book. This is narrated by Cousin Fanny, because of course there is always a Cousin Fanny, who every now and again stays with her privileged and eccentric family members, and she's mainly following the life of her cousin Linda, who is very passionate and just always looking for love. She's just falling through life, and this is Cousin Fanny basically telling that story about Linda. So I am looking forward to reading this. The August prompt is a book whose title starts with the same letter as your birthday month. Well, that's pretty convenient because this is an August book and I was born in August, so I needed a book with the letter A. So I chose Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This fits into one of my reading goals for reading more children's literature. I have actually never read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and I generally have shied away from this book for two reasons. One, I'm not into literary nonsense, and this, the whole story is, essentially nonsense. And the second reason is that I heard a rumor, and I don't know if it's true, so I have to do more research on it, that Lewis Carroll may or may not have had an unhealthy obsession with the girl that may or may not have inspired this story. I'm going to read the story, and then I'm going to do a little more research to see, if it's true or not. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I hope to God he's not a scumbag. September's prompt is a debut book by a Massachusetts author. This took me forever to choose a book. And I just agonized over the choice. The Massachusetts author, should they have been born here? Should they be living here when they wrote the book? Should they be living here now? What are the parameters of such authors' residence in Massachusetts? And I have so many books by Massachusetts authors: Louisa May Alcott, Henry David Thoreau, W.E.B. Du Bois, but I didn't own any of their debut books, so I couldn't choose any of those. I ended up choosing, and I'm still kind of not sure if this works, I chose The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Now, Sylvia Plath was born in Massachusetts. She did live here for a pretty decent chunk of time, but I think The Bell Jar was actually written when she was living in England. I have never read The Bell Jar. I don't know much about it except that it's about a woman with mental illness, and it's probably going to be a heavy read. It's not fitting in with my current readings, that I'm trying to be somewhat light and fluffy and not so heavy, but I know that this is a classic. I've never read it, and Sylvia fits, this is her debut novel. October's prompt, a book about a time in history you'd like to know more about. I chose Last Boat Out of Shanghai The Epic Story of the Chinese Who Fled Mao's Revolution. This is by Helen Zia. And this is a nonfiction book following 4 people as they try to escape China during Mao's 1949 cultural, I think it was called the Cultural Revolution, well, the Communist Revolution, essentially, when China became a communist country. And I like learning about non-Western history, so I think this will be interesting. For November, the prompt is a relaxing, soul-soothing book. I chose The Silent Traveler in Edinburgh by Chang Yi. And I am actually really excited to read this. I found this in a thrift store and I was like, this cover is just beautiful. Turns out Chang Yi actually illustrated all his books. So this is actually his illustration. Chang Yi wrote several books under the moniker The Silent Traveler. This is just one of them. He's, I think, done The Silent Traveler in London, The Silent Traveler in Paris. He wrote them between 1933 and 1955. He was a Chinese expat living in England, and he wrote about them from his perspective on things that might be familiar to a Chinese national at that time. From what I understand, these are very adorable and ironic and funny, and I love travel. I'm really looking forward, so I think it will be a relaxing book for me. December's prompt, a well-reviewed book in your least favorite genre. I chose Julia, a retelling of George Orwell's 1984, and this is by Sandra Newman. This one might kind of be cheating a little because I'm not exactly sure if it's well-reviewed or not. I know it came out recently and people on BookTube have been talking about it a lot. I don't know if it's well-reviewed, but it's dystopian, which is one of my least favorite genres. So I think it kind of fits the bill. This is told from the perspective of Julia Worthing, who is the love interest of Winston Smith from the classic 1984. I do have 1984 kicking around here somewhere. I haven't read it in a really long time. It is due for a reread, so maybe I will combine the two together and see how I feel about it. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining. And if you would like to learn more about the reading challenge, I will include all of the information in the description box. And thank you very much. Have a great day.